let's bring in our panel right now. And tonight we are joined by Jimmy Fieldkind. He's the Albany Bureau Chief for Capital. Dominic Carter, you know him, political journalist and author. And Andrew Whitman, who we've seen all too much of tonight, our senior political correspondent. I kid because I care, Andrew. Okay. Jimmy, usually who cares about a running mate? Let's be honest right now. I think if I asked people who for the last 4 years Cuomo's running mate was, I'd get blank stares. Maybe one would know. But the selection that Astorino made, it does, at least to me, cue a few things. First off, he is one of the loudest voices against the SAFE Act. We know that's going to be an issue in the campaign. He's also a person of color, which will put some pressure on the governor to maybe go for the Buffalo mayor as his running mate. And finally, to me, it sets a tone that he's not just in here to try and, Astorino that is, to get some name recognition. He's going to make this thing uncomfortable for the governor, and he's almost going to try and bait the governor to get into a fight with him. Do I have it right?
I think that's about right. I think that there was the SAFE Act, and trying to energize that upstate base is an important factor and one that Sheriff Moss brings to the table. I do think that appointing an African American is historic. It is the first time the Republican Party, as near as we can tell from talking to historians and others, has nominated an African American to a statewide ticket. So that in of itself is historic, and there have only been 3 others on the Democratic side who have done this. David Patterson, his father Basil Patterson in 1970, and Carl McCall, who of course was the nominee and elected comptroller and then ran for governor unsuccessfully in 2002. What we've heard from Astorino is that in order to be successful, any Republican candidate knows that they have to run up the score upstate, they have to fight even and win in the suburbs, and they have to not get clobbered in New York City. And so having an African American helps you with, for the Republicans, they've been talking a lot about this at the convention, reaching out to non-traditional constituencies, reaching out to communities of color. So I think it certainly helps. Now, the flip side of that is this guy going to drive it up? Is by having a person of color on the ticket going to drive up turnout in that community? No, absolutely not. That's an incredibly simplistic analysis, and I'm not pretending to it. Does it help? Yes, and I think you hit it right on the head, Richard. This puts pressure, Republicans say, on Cuomo to not put a 4th white male on the statewide ticket, which is exactly what he did in 2010, and it's something for which he was criticized most vocally by City Councilman Charles Barron, an African American who ran a third-party challenge based on this issue.
Dominic, I know this is the definition inside base. We're talking running mates, lieutenant governors, but there are those who say next to the governor that he's not going to just appease people with a pick because he saw what happened to Spitzer. You need somebody competent if something happens to run the state of New York. It's not a hypothetical anymore. It happened. And also temperamentally, governor doesn't like getting pushed into the corner by anybody, does he?
Well, your first point, you sure do need a competent person. And that's not to say that Governor Patterson was incompetent, but the point being, Spitzer's elected governor. He selects David Patterson as his running mate. No one ever thought that David Patterson would be running the state of New York.
I don't think David Patterson thought
I don't even think David Patterson thought that. We all thought David Patterson was going to be there for a short time and go to the Senate, Spitzer replacing Hillary Clinton. Spitzer gets in trouble. Thus, David Patterson's the governor of New York State. Jimmy mentioned the word energize, and I have to agree, and I'm sure Andrew would mention the same word, energize. This is about energizing the base. And you have to give Astorino, whether you like him or not, a lot of credit. A brilliant move going with a law enforcement African-American conservative to play with the upstate base to energize the party. You know, they're already losing the enrollment battle to Democrats, and whether Governor Cuomo, to answer your second part of your question, whether he likes it or not, this puts enormous pressure on Cuomo.
Well, I question how many votes a lieutenant gubernatorial nominee is worth, no matter who it is or what the circumstances. Maybe it can be a drag on a ticket, let's say in a vice presidential nomination for a national election, but certainly not on a statewide election. But, you know, this, I think, does tip the hand a little bit for Astorino. He thinks there's a path to the governor's mansion through energizing his base. We've seen in poll numbers there's some weakness to Cuomo's left. If he's got a third-party challenger, or if there's somebody else, or maybe the thought is that Democrats stay home because they're just not that thrilled with Andrew Cuomo as their standard bearer. If that's the case, if he can run up the score with Republicans and get them energized and get them out to the ballot, that may be his only route.
You know, this sounds a silly question, but I've had people tell me off the record close that if he gets the 43%, Astorino, they're going to be doing cartwheels at the end of the day because the registration, the money advantage, the name recognition, all the things that are stacked in a deck against Republicans for statewide office in New York. But then there's some who say, hey, all we got to do is look across the river. And if there's a scandal, it doesn't even have to be Bridgegate. All of a sudden it opens up because people are afraid of Cuomo in Democratic circles. It's not that they love him. To that end, do Republicans see the best way that this thing even becomes within 10 points is that maybe Bahara finds something in this Moreland Commission investigation that turns it? Is there any pathway, Jimmy, that this thing's competitive?
Of course, there's always a pathway, and I think it's a big trap for anyone to say this far from Election Day that it's over. It's not over. It's not far from over. Now, Rob Astorino knows as well as anybody the immense challenges that he faces as a candidate. He's got a fundraising disadvantage that's massive. He has a name recognition disadvantage that's massive, and he has Andrew Cuomo, one of the most skilled political operators we've seen in the modern history of the state.
In a blue state.
Doing everything, right. Say nothing of the enrollment, but doing everything he can to kneecap Astorino. Cuomo is trying to cut off his donor base. Cuomo has been talking to legislators, Republican legislators, courting them. So that said, what Astorino needs to do is be a competent, persistent critic to Cuomo. And I think that all the skills we've seen in his earlier elections in Westchester County show that he can do that.
But this is what happened in Westchester. Spano engaged him, okay? And I covered the first race where he got blown out by Spano. He won the second one, I think, in part because he is a likable character, and you have to have the other party engage you. Can anybody see a case, unless he can get under Cuomo's skin, that the governor even acknowledges him other than through third-party ads? I mean, if he doesn't, I don't see how he gets there.
He's already under the governor's skin. I've known Andrew Cuomo a very long time. The fact that Astorino is competent and running a decent campaign thus far enormously gets under this governor's skin.
I think it's only a matter of time before he's able to directly engage Cuomo in some way. And the analogy that I think of as a younger brother, I say this, you know, it's like the younger brother who can't beat up the older brother, but you just keep poking and poking and poking, and finally the older sibling just goes nuts, and then you say, "Whoa, I don't know about that."
Caught him on camera, and he's shot.
But I don't think Astorino has his big issue yet. I'm not sure of any of the issues that have popped up. I mean, fracking, housing settlement, guns. I don't think that's enough to put the dent in or to get Cuomo to engage to the level that he wants to. He's hoping, and other Republicans are hoping, that the economy and the fiscal health of New York is enough of an issue, but that's a little esoteric in a lot of ways for a lot of people. He hasn't found his big issue yet.
I don't want to get on the couch here, but can somebody, and we'll talk more about this next week when we have the Democrats convention, why has the governor not only alienated, but even targeted Democrats? I mean, what did Tom DiNapoli ever do to anybody, right? I mean, but Schneiderman, you talk to his folks, not even so quietly, they'll tell you this governor's gone out of his way to crunch him. In fact, we thought maybe they'd even be matching funds in the AG's race. And you talk to other statewide officials, it's the same thing. Is it that he doesn't want to share the stage with anybody? He sees them as threats here. He's got genuine issues with each one individually. He's running alone here in New York. And in some ways, that's not too dissimilar to Christie in Connecticut. Why is that?
You know, I think this goes back to, you know, this is sort of, as you said, an on-the-couch question, but, you know, Andrew Cuomo recognizes that any competing center of power, be it a center of power built around the comptroller's office, built around the attorney general's office, is by definition a potential threat to him. And so if you have two people who come in, you know, DiNapoli was elected weak. He came through in something of a cloud of scandal from that office. He was not elected in 2006. Remember, he was appointed, and in 2010, he won by a fairly narrow margin. I believe it was about 52 to 48 when all was said and done. Schneiderman, a rookie to the office that Cuomo used to run, keep them down. Cuomo's very aware of the power of the AG's office. He's very aware of the power of the comptroller's office. Remember, he has spent decades in Albany. And so I honestly don't think that it's much more than that.
Cuomo hasn't objected to Jeff Kline and the breakaway Democratic / Republican
Why
leadership
would he?
of the
It
state
marginalizes the
Senate.
Senate.
I think it's helpful in some aspect to have a foil rather than a friend to sort of run against or to butt heads with. You can make yourself look that much more invigorated or vital to your base or to your interests. And look good by comparison. Look, I'm fighting off the Republicans. That shows I'm presidential material.
Richard, it's as simple as this, and it's a personality trait that I've seen over the last 30 years. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. Most successful politicians, from Rudy Giuliani to Chris Christie, who's now in trouble, to Andrew Cuomo, They have this personality trait of there can only be one king, one the man in the room, and guess what? That person happens to be them in their point of view. It's as simple as that.
We've seen
and no one else.
It works until you get in trouble.
Until
then
Christie in New Jersey.
you got no allies or base here
Right.
because they fear you. They
Right.
don't love you. Okay, please be sure to tune in to RFL tomorrow night, and we will have day 2 of the GOP convention in Westchester. So much more. Obviously, our senior political correspondent Andrew Whitman. He's going to have complete coverage and much more from the interview and the event. Jimmy, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Great job. Coming up next, everybody, we're going to tell you what to look forward to not just tomorrow, but for the balance of the week.